Hi guys. Tonight we're stepping into a night that does not want you here. You're standing outside an isolated cabin while the wind tightens its grip, snow moving sideways, stinging your cheeks, finding every seam in your coat. The sky's already dark, even though the evening feels young. Clouds hang low and heavy, swallowing moonlight before it ever has a chance. You pause with one hand on the door, listening to the storm breathe because that is what it sounds like. Breathing. Slow, powerful, patient. This is the kind of night where the world feels reduced to whatever you can touch. And yes, you probably will not survive this if you make careless choices. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. There is something comforting about knowing where everyone else is while you're alone in a storm like this. Now dim the lights. You push the door open and step inside. The cabin greets you with a smell that is both reassuring and sharp. Old wood, cold iron, a trace of smoke that never quite leaves the walls. You close the door behind you, leaning into it for a moment as the wind slams against the outside, frustrated as if it has lost something it wanted. The sound dulls instantly. Not silence, but a thickened quiet. The kind that presses inward rather than echoing out. This is a real thing people experienced across the American frontier. Settlers and trappers recorded how storms could isolate cabins for days, sometimes weeks, cutting off trails, rivers, and any sense of direction. A single structure in a blizzard became its own small universe. What you feel now is that boundary forming. The cabin is no longer just shelter. It is the entire world. You move carefully because cold makes every movement feel louder. The floorboards creak under your boots, a slow complaint that seems to hang in the air. You take your coat off but do not hang it far from the fire. Damp wool steals heat faster than bare skin, something people learned the hard way. There's an old frontier trick mentioned casually in journals of sleeping with boots under your blanket so they do not freeze solid by morning. Quirky, practical, and very real. Tonight those boots are staying close. The fire is already burning low and steady. Not dramatic, not generous, just enough. That was intentional. Many cabins avoided large flames during storms because strong fires pulled air too quickly, sucking cold drafts through cracks in the walls. It is one of those plain facts of frontier life that sounds obvious only after you learn it. Heat had to be controlled, not admired. You crouch near the hearth, holding your hands out, palms open. The warmth is slow, uneven. It does not rush to you. It asks for patience. Outside, the wind finds the corners of the cabin and tests them. You hear it probing a long, low moan along the logs, then a sharper hiss, where snow forces itself against the seams. You begin to understand something important. The storm is not random. It is methodical. People at the time often describe blizzards as living things, and while that sounds poetic, it also reflects how they experienced them. Historians still argue whether this language was metaphor or a genuine psychological response to prolonged isolation and danger. When the environment feels intentional, your brain treats it as a presence. Sitting here now, you feel watched even though there is nothing to see. You walk the perimeter of the cabin one slow circuit. This is not nervousness, this is inventory. You note the thickness of the walls, the way snow has already begun to pile against the lower logs. You check the latch on the door, the small window shutter, the stack of firewood within reach. These actions were standard practice repeated night after night during severe weather. Routine was a form of calm. There is a small table scarred by use and a chair pulled close to the fire. You sit listening. The cabin responds with its own sounds, wood contracting as temperatures drop. A faint pop from the fire. Somewhere above you, snow sliding off the roof in a soft, heavy sigh. Each noise feels magnified because there is nothing else competing for your attention. Night deepens without ceremony. No sunset, no stars. Just a gradual sense that the world beyond the walls has withdrawn entirely. This is what people meant when they wrote about frontier nights feeling endless. Without streetlights, without distant engines, without neighbours, close enough to hear darkness becomes a physical condition. You're not in the dark. You're surrounded by it. There's an odd comfort in this once the first edge of fear passes. Your responsibilities narrow. Stay warm. Stay aware. Wait. That is all. Modern life rarely gives you nights like this where the list of concerns shrinks instead of grows. Still a part of you remains alert. You know that mistakes here matter more. You add one small piece of wood to the fire listening as it settles. Sparks rise briefly then fade. You do not add more. People learned that restraint kept fires alive longer through the night. Overfeeding them early meant waking to cold embers before dawn, a practical lesson passed along without fuss. As you sit back, wrapping yourself in a blanket that smells faintly of smoke and old fabric, the blizzard presses harder outside. Snow rattles against the walls like dry sand. Wind climbs the cabin, then drops away. You breathe slowly, matching your rhythm to the space you're in. This is the beginning of a long night. Not dramatic yet, just closed in, just sealed. And as you settle, you realize something subtle, but important. Night out here does not arrive all at once. It tightens inch by inch until you notice there is nowhere else to be. The first thing you notice after sitting still for a while is how the cabin changes its mind about silence. At first it felt quiet in a simple way, like closing a door in a noisy house. Now the quiet has layers, it thickens, it settles. Every sound seems to arrive late, as if it has to push through the cold before reaching your ears. You become aware of your own breathing, not loud, but present, shaping the space around you. This is something people wrote about often in frontier letters, though rarely with much explanation. Night inside a cabin was not truly silent, it was selective. Certain noises disappeared completely. Others grew more noticeable. A mouse scratching behind a wall could sound as important as a knock at the door. A loose beam shifting under snow weight could pull your full attention. Learning which sounds mattered was not instinct. It was learned slowly, sometimes painfully. You adjust your position in the chair, then stop. The movement feels too loud. The blanket slides against your clothing with a dry whisper that seems to linger. You smile faintly at yourself. Cold cabins teach restraint. People learned to move less, not out of fear, but efficiency. Motion wastes heat. It also wastes calm. The fire offers a low, steady presence. It murmurs rather than crackles. That sound becomes a reference point. As long as you can hear it, things are manageable. When the wind howls outside, the fire's voice grounds you a reminder that something inside this room is still under your control. There is a mainstream historical detail that surprises many people. Frontier cabins were rarely airtight by modern standards, but they were designed to breathe just enough to keep fires from choking the room. That meant sound travelled in strange ways, so wind could be heard inside walls. Snow could whisper through cracks. There is a faint ticking sound now, not mechanical, organic. Wood contracting as temperatures drop further. Logs respond to cold like muscles tightening. The sound is slow, irregular, almost thoughtful. It does not alarm you, but you register it. This kind of noise filled many winter nights and became background knowledge for those who lived with it. Quirky as it sounds, some settlers claimed they could tell how cold it was getting by how often the cabin spoke back to them. You lean forward, elbows on your knees, hands loosely clasped. Your boots are still on. That choice was deliberate. Removing footwear too early could mean numb toes by morning, and numbness was dangerous. It hid injury. It hid frostbite. People understood this even if they did not use those words. Practical wisdom often arrived before formal explanation. The storm outside continues its work. Wind presses snow against the walls in pulses like waves. The sound dulls everything else for a moment, then recedes. When it pulls back, the quiet rushes in to fill the space it leaves. That quiet feels heavier each time. It presses inward. You find yourself listening not for sound, but for change. This kind of listening was common. Diaries mention nights spent awake not from fear exactly, but from attentiveness. People stayed half alert, gauging the health of their shelter by sound alone. Historians still argue whether this constant awareness contributed to long-term anxiety among isolated settlers, or whether it became so normalized that it faded into the background. Sitting here now, you feel both possibilities. The vigilance is tiring, but it is also oddly calming. There is clarity in having one task. Your nose picks up the scent of the room more clearly now. Smoke, old sap, wool damp with melted snow. There is also a faint mineral smell from the iron stove or hearth fitting, sharp and clean. Smell becomes more important at night. Without sight, without variety, the senses rearrange themselves. You notice things you would overlook during the day. You stand briefly and walk a few steps, testing the floor. Each board answers you. You memorize those responses. That creak means wait. That softer groan means cold. This mapping of sound to space happens naturally. By morning, if morning comes quietly, you will know if something is wrong just by what you hear. You sit again closer to the fire now and let your shoulders drop. Outside, the blizzard shows no sign of tiring. Inside, the cabin settles into itself as if accepting the long night ahead. The silence is no longer empty. It is full of information. You're learning its language one sound at a time. Cold begins to work its way into your thinking, not sharply but gradually, like a suggestion repeated often enough to feel true. It slows you, not in a dangerous way yet, but in a narrowing way. Choices feel heavier. You notice yourself considering whether standing up is worth the effort, whether reaching for another log should wait a few more minutes. This is not laziness, it is calculation. Cold trains the mind to weigh cost against benefit with unusual seriousness. People living through Wild West winters understood this intuitively. One well-known historical reality is that isolated cabins were often positioned deliberately to reduce exposure to prevailing winds, even if that meant less sunlight. Shelter mattered more than brightness. That choice followed settlers into every decision once night fell. Nothing happened quickly, everything was paced. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, then pause, listening to the fabric as it moves. Even that soft rustle seems significant. Your body heat is now a resource you can almost feel being measured. You tuck your hands beneath the blanket instead of holding them out to the fire. Direct heat feels good, but it fades quickly once removed. Trapped warmth lasts longer. This was a quiet lesson learned by experience rather than instruction. The fire continues its low work. It does not demand attention, but you keep one part of your awareness trained on it. You notice how often you glance toward the hearth, without meaning to. Flame height, ember glow, smoke behavior. These details become reassuring landmarks in an otherwise shifting night. A quirky detail found in some frontier accounts mentions people naming their stoves or fires during long winters, speaking to them as if to companions. It sounds strange until you realize how limited social contact could become. Sound even imagine filled gaps. Outside, the wind shifts direction slightly. You can tell because the sound changes pitch. It is no longer scraping directly across the wall, but circling, searching. Snow hisses against the logs, then drops away in small collapses. The storm is not uniform. It has texture. You find yourself tracking it the way you might track waves at sea. Your thoughts slow further. Not foggy, just deliberate. Each idea arrives, sits for a moment, then drifts off if it proves unnecessary. This mental narrowing is a known effect of prolonged cold exposure. Modern researchers discuss it in terms of cognitive load, but the people who lived this did not need labels. They knew that cold nights required simplicity. Do less. Think less. Conserve. You remember something you read once, a line from a winter letter. describing how night made men thoughtful and women quiet. The phrasing feels dated now, but the observation holds a kernel of truth. Cold strips conversation down to essentials. Tonight alone, your internal conversation does the same. You're not replaying old arguments or planning distant futures. You are present. There is a faint ache in your fingers, not pain, just awareness. You flex them slowly inside the blanket. Movement creates warmth, but too much movement loses it. This balance was a constant negotiation. Some people swore by rhythmic toe, wiggling to maintain circulation without exposing feet. Others believe stillness was better. Historians still argue whether such practices truly affected outcomes, or whether survival often came down to shelter quality and luck. Sitting here, you understand why opinions differed. Everybody feels cold differently. You lean back in the chair and close your eyes briefly. Darkness inside the cabin is absolute now. Even the fire casts more suggestion than light. Shadows do not dance, they hover. You listen instead. Wind, fire, wood, your breath. The sounds line up like beads on a string, each one steady, predictable. There is comfort in predictability. Fear fades when patterns emerge. Earlier the storm felt aggressive. Now it feels persistent. That shift matters. People were less afraid of long storms than sudden ones. A blizzard that announced itself allowed preparation. One that arrived without warning caused panic. Tonight you had time. That knowledge settles your nerves. You become aware of your heartbeat slow and firm. Cold nights often made people acutely conscious of their own bodies. Without distraction, physical sensations grew louder. The thump of blood, the stretch of muscle, the subtle tremor when warmth dipped too low. This awareness was not morbid, it was practical. It kept people alive. Your gaze drifts toward the small window shuttered tight. Behind it the world is erased. Snow reflects no light. Sky offers no reference. The idea of distance loses meaning. A mile and a foot feel the same when you cannot see either. This disorientation was common enough that some settlers marked interior walls with scratches or notches just to anchor themselves in time and space during long winters. A strange habit, perhaps, but grounding. You open your eyes again and adjust the blanket once more. The fire shifts slightly as a log settles. A small shower of sparks rises, then disappears. You smile at that tiny drama. It is enough. More than enough. Night in a blizzard does not demand entertainment. It demands endurance. As minutes pass, measured only by changes in sound and sensation, you realize that cold has not defeated you. It has negotiated with you. It has set terms. Move less. Think smaller. Listen more. You accept these terms without resentment. This is how people survived nights like this, not by fighting the cold, but by cooperating with it. The firelight becomes something you negotiate with rather than trust. Earlier it felt like a companion. Now you understand its limits. The glow barely reaches the corners of the cabin, leaving the walls to dissolve into shadow. Light here does not conquer darkness. It coexists with it, occupying only a small claimed circle on the floor and your knees. You add another piece of wood, careful in how you place it. Not directly on the brightest embers, but angled slightly, allowing it to warm before it burns. People who lived through these winters learnt this technique by observation. Sudden flames consumed fuel too quickly. Slow ignition stretched warmth across hours. Many winter journals quietly mention fires that were fed the way one feeds an animal. Patiently, predictably. The air shifts as the log begins to catch. Smoke thickens for a moment, then clears as the draft settles. You watch closely. Smoke lingering too long would mean opening a vent or door, and that would invite the storm inside. Frontier cabins often balanced on this edge. Enough airflow to breathe, not enough to freeze. A delicate equation that was adjusted constantly, even through the night. There is a faint warmth along your shins now. Not strong, but steady. You hold your hands closer, then pull them back under the blanket again. Direct heat tempts you to linger, but you know better. The fire's warmth is borrowed. The blanket's warmth is kept. This distinction mattered more than comfort. It was survival logic. A lesser-known habit described in a few accounts involved warming stones near the fire, then wrapping them in cloth to place near feet or along the spine during sleep. It sounds clever, and sometimes it worked. Sometimes it cracked stones or caused burns. Practices like this spread unevenly, shaped by trial rather than instruction. There was no manual for nights like this, only experience. You shift your chair, slightly angling it away from a faint draft creeping along the floor. Cold air always finds the lowest point. You feel it brush your ankles like water. Raising your feet onto a small crate changes everything. This was a common adjustment mentioned casually in winter recollections. Elevation mattered. Even a few inches made a difference. The fire settles again, its sound changing from gentle crackle to something more like breathing. Slow intake, soft release. You begin to time your own breathing to it without meaning to. In through the nose, out slowly. Breathing this way warms air before it reaches your lungs, a detail people learned early and remembered always. Mouth breathing chilled too quickly. Your eyes grow heavy, but not with sleep. With effort. Staying awake feels intentional. Many people didn't aim to sleep deeply on nights like this. They rested lightly, ready to respond if something shifted. Fire dying, wind changing, roof groaning under snow weight. Rest became a series of pauses rather than a plunge. There is an old belief recorded occasionally that fires burned lower at midnight regardless of how they were fed. Some swore by it. Others dismissed it as imagination shaped by fatigue. Modern explanations point to temperature drops affecting draft. Still, the belief persisted long enough to influence behaviour. People added wood preemptively just in case. The line between observation and superstition blurred easily at night. You notice how shadows stretch and compress as the fire changes shape. The room never looks the same twice. Objects seem closer then farther depending on flame height. Without steady light, depth becomes uncertain. You reach for your cup of water and miss it by an inch. You laugh softly at yourself. Sound feels intrusive, so you stop. The storm outside does not let up. Wind rises, then falls, then rises again. Snow taps the roof in irregular patterns. Each tap sounds heavier than it should, magnified by your focus. You listen for scraping, for sliding, for anything that suggests weight shifting above you. Roof collapse was rare but not unheard of. People slept with one ear trained upward during heavy snowfall. There is debate among scholars about how much sleep frontier settlers actually got during storms. Some evidence suggests long periods of wakefulness broken by short rests. Other accounts describe deep exhaustion-driven sleep. The truth likely varied by individual and circumstance. Sitting here, you feel suspended between those states, tired but alert, calm but ready. You lean back and let your shoulders rest against the chair. Wood presses through fabric, solid and reassuring. This chair has weight. It belongs here. Everything inside this cabin feels anchored while the world outside feels fluid and hostile. That contrast is comforting. The firelight dims slightly as embers settle. You resist the urge to intervene. Not yet. Let it do its work. Let the night unfold at its own pace. You are learning the rhythm of this place. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady enough to last. The wind changes its approach and you feel it before you fully hear it. Earlier it pressed directly against the walls, a steady force. Now it begins to slide along the cabin's sides, circling, testing. The sound shifts from a blunt roar to something more deliberate. A long scrape, a brief whistle, a hollow thump where snow packs itself tighter against the logs. The storm is learning the shape of this place. You sit still and let your ears do the work. Every cabin had its own weaknesses, and people who lived in them knew those weak points intimately. A corner where chinking thinned. A seam near the roofline that always sighed under pressure. Period descriptions often mention how experienced settlers could tell which side of the cabin the wind favoured just by listening. Orientation mattered. It influenced where beds were placed and where supplies were stored. A draft brushes your calf cool and persistent. You shift the crate under your feet slightly, then wedge it closer to the wall. The cold eases. This small adjustment feels like a victory, even though it is barely noticeable. That is how nights like this worked. Survival came in inches, not leaps. There is a curious detail that surfaces now and then in winter accounts. Some people stuffed spare clothing, or even old newspapers, into cracks during storms, not as permanent insulation but as temporary barriers. It was messy and imperfect, but it worked well enough to slow airflow. You glance at the walls, imagining how many such small interventions once stood between warmth and danger. The wind surges again, louder this time. Snow rattles against the door, then piles so heavily that the sound dulls into a soft, constant pressure. The door no longer feels like an exit. It feels like a boundary. Outside might as well be another world. Inside, the air feels closer, heavier shaped by your presence and the fire's breath. You stand and press your palm lightly against the wall. Cold seeps through, immediately firm and undeniable. Logs hold warmth poorly once the temperature drops far enough. This was widely understood by those who built cabins, which is why they relied so heavily on interior layers like blankets, furs, and hanging cloth to trap heat closer to the body. The structure blocked wind. The furnishings preserved warmth. A sharp gust strikes the roof, and for a moment you hear a low groan overhead. Snow shifts, slides, settles again. Your shoulders tense, then relax when the sound stops. Heavy snow could strain even well-built cabins, and people learn to recognize the difference between harmless settling and true danger. That knowledge often came from listening more than looking. You return to your chair and pull the blanket tighter. The fire flickers in response to the draft, briefly brightening, then calming. You make a mental note. Wind from this direction affects the hearth more strongly. If it worsens, adjustments will be needed. This kind of mental cataloguing happened constantly. No one wrote it down. It lived in habit. There is disagreement among historians about how much control settlers truly had over their environment during severe storms. Some argue that cabins offered only the illusion of safety. Others point to survival rates as evidence of effective adaptation. Sitting here, you feel both truths at once. The cabin protects you, but only if you pay attention. Neglect would be costly. Your senses feel sharpened now. You notice the way the firelight bends around the chair legs, the way shadows cling to corners instead of stretching freely, the way the wind pauses just long enough to make you wonder if it has stopped before returning stronger than before. These patterns hold your focus better than any clock. You shift your weight and listen to the floor respond. A familiar creak reassures you. Nothing has changed beneath your feet. The cabin remains stable, grounded, stubborn. That stubbornness matters. It mirrors the mindset people needed to endure places like this. Yield where necessary, hold firm where possible. The wind continues its probing, but you no longer interpret it as an attack. It feels more like pressure testing. The storm presses, the cabin answers. You sit between them wrapped in borrowed warmth and careful awareness, understanding that this exchange will continue for hours, and so you wait not anxiously but attentively, letting the night reveal itself one sound and sensation at a time. Darkness outside loses its depth first. You notice it not with your eyes but with your sense of space. Earlier you could imagine distance beyond the walls, fields buried under snow trees bending somewhere out there. Now that mental map collapses. The night presses flat against the cabin as if the storm has erased everything beyond arm's reach. There is no horizon anymore. just wall roof and the idea of snow stacked endlessly beyond them. Inside light behaves differently than it did an hour ago. The fire still burns, but its glow no longer feels like illumination. It feels contained, almost cautious. Shadows do not stretch outward. They cling close to objects, thick and unmoving. Corners become pockets of absence rather than darkened space. You realize that without changing the fire, the room will not look any different no matter how long you stare. Vision has reached its limit. This sensation was familiar to people who lived through severe winter nights. Period descriptions often remark that darkness felt heavier during storms, not because there was less light, but because there was less contrast. Snow swallowed reflection. Clouds erased the sky. Indoors, the eye had nothing to negotiate with. Darkness became a surface instead of a void. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. Nothing changes. That more than anything signals how complete the night has become. Sight steps aside and the other senses quietly take over. Sound remains first. The wind continues to move around the cabin, but now it feels closer, more intimate. Not louder, just nearer, as if the storm is leaning in. You listen to the fire for reassurance. It responds with a soft, steady sound, but even that seems subdued. Embers glow low red rather than orange. You resist the urge to stir them. Brightness would be temporary. Stability matters more. People who endured these nights learned to value consistency over comfort. A fire that lasted was better than a fire that dazzled. There is a curious practice mentioned occasionally in winter stories where people deliberately allowed cabins to grow darker as the night deepened. Less light meant less movement. Less movement meant less heat lost. Darkness became a tool rather than an inconvenience. Sitting here now, you understand the logic. Stillness feels easier when you cannot see much anyway. The smell of the room becomes more noticeable. Smoke softened by time. Wood warmed just enough to release its scent. The faint mustiness of blankets used again and again through cold seasons. These smells anchor you. They tell you where you are without requiring sight. In a world narrowed by whether familiarity matters, you reach out and touch the table beside you, fingers brushing its rough edge. The texture grounds you, solid, unchanging. People often kept certain objects within arm's reach at night for this reason. A mug, a tool, something known. In darkness, touch replaces sight as reassurance. Outside, the storm pauses for a moment. Not fully, just enough that the wind drops to a whisper. The sudden quiet feels louder than the noise. Your breath catches. You wait. Moments like this unsettled many people. Silence in a blizzard often preceded stronger gusts. The pause feels loaded. Sure enough, the wind returns, sliding hard along the wall before striking the door with a muted thud. Snow shifts again on the roof. The cabin answers with a low creak. You exhale slowly. This exchange of forces has become familiar now, almost routine. There is ongoing disagreement among researchers about how people perceive time during long winter nights. Some argue that darkness compressed it, making hours feel shorter. Others suggest the opposite, that isolation stretched time unbearably thin. Your experience feels somewhere between. Minutes pass quickly when you're listening, slowly when you are waiting. You lean back and let the chair support you fully. Muscles release in small increments. Your body adapts to the posture it will hold for a while. Cold nights taught people to settle into positions they could maintain without strain. Comfort was measured by sustainability, not softness. The darkness remains complete. No moon, no starlight, no glow through cracks. It feels as if the cabin floats in a void untethered from the rest of the world. And yet inside everything remains tangible. Fire, wood, breath, heartbeat. These are enough. You realize that night has finished arriving. There will be no further deepening. This is as closed in as it gets. The storm has claimed the outside. The cabin holds what remains. You sit quietly within that boundary, letting the darkness stay exactly where it is. Listening becomes your main task now, though you never consciously assigned it. Your ears stay open even as your body rests. You're no longer reacting to every sound, only noting differences. The cabin has established a baseline. Fire breathing softly, wind sliding then pressing, wood responding in slow, familiar ways. Against that pattern, anything new would stand out immediately. People who spent winters like this learned that listening was a form of safety. Letters and journals from the period repeatedly suggest that many night decisions were made without light at all. Sound carried information more reliably than sight. A loose shutter announced itself with a different tone than shifting snow. A settling roof spoke differently than a falling branch. Over time, these distinctions became instinctive. You tilt your head slightly, letting one ear favour the wall where the wind sounds strongest. The noise there is steady now, a low continuous rush, with occasional sharper notes when gusts find a gap. You note those higher pitches. They mean moving air, drafts, places where warmth escapes faster. You do not fix them yet, you simply remember. The fire makes a faint popping sound, then settles again. You count a few breaths between each pop. The spacing feels right, even. This quiet monitoring would look like idleness to anyone watching, but it is not. It is attention stretched thin and wide at the same time. An unusual habit surfaces in a handful of winter recollections where people claimed they could tell approaching danger by changes in the fire's sound alone. A hiss where there should be a murmur, a sudden flare without added fuel. While modern explanations point to airflow shifts, the belief itself shaped behaviour. People trusted their fires enough to treat them like messengers. You shift your weight slightly, testing how the floor responds. The familiar creak answers you unchanged. That reassures you more than silence would. Silence can hide problems. Sound reveals them. Outside, something strikes the cabin with a dull thud. Not sharp enough to be ice. Not heavy enough to be a falling limb. Probably snow sliding from the roof or drifting from a nearby surface. You wait. Nothing follows. No cracking. No continued scraping. You release the breath you didn't realize you were holding. This ability to wait without panicking was learned not innate. Accounts from early frontier settlements suggest that newcomers often mistook harmless sounds for threats exhausting themselves with unnecessary responses. Those who lasted learned restraint. Not every noise deserved action. Knowing which ones did was the real skill. You bring the blanket higher around your neck, tucking the edge under your chin. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and old air. Comforting. Familiar. You lean your head back and let your gaze rest somewhere between the fire and the darkness beyond it. You're not looking at anything in particular, you're simply keeping your eyes open. There is no agreement among historians about how often people truly slept through storms like this. Some personal accounts suggest long stretches of full rest, while others imply near constant wakefulness. The truth likely varied by individual tolerance and experience. Sitting here, you feel yourself drifting in and out of alertness, not asleep, not fully awake, balanced on the edge. Your breathing slows further, in through the nose, out gently. Each breath warms the next. This pattern was widely practiced, even if rarely written about. Children learned it early. Adults relied on it without comment. It conserved warmth and calmed the body at the same time. The wind outside rises briefly, then drops again. You note the rhythm. Stronger gusts seem to come in clusters, then pause. That pause matters. It tells you the storm is organized, not chaotic. Organized storms can be endured. Unpredictable ones wear people down. You listen again for the smallest sounds. A mouse, perhaps. The scrape of tiny claws. Nothing yet. Small animals often sought shelter in cabins during blizzards, a fact mentioned often enough to be taken for granted. Their presence was not usually dangerous, just another reminder that warmth attracts life. Your eyes grow heavy again, but you keep them open. The fire glows steadily. The cabin holds. The storm continues its patient pressure. You have learned enough of the night's language now to rest within it, trusting that if something truly changes, you will hear it. For the moment nothing does, and that in itself is information. Hunger arrives without ceremony. It does not announce itself with pain or urgency. It settles in quietly like the cold did earlier, as a gentle awareness that your body is burning through reserves. You notice it when you shift in the chair and feel a faint hollow sensation just beneath your ribs. Not uncomfortable, informative. Frontier records consistently point to the importance of evening meals during winter, especially before storms. People ate not for pleasure but strategy. Foods heavy with fat and grain were favoured because they released energy, slowly feeding warmth through the night. You remember what you ate earlier and feel a small sense of relief. The choice mattered more now than it did then. You reach for a small portion, you set aside something dense and simple. You eat slowly, deliberately, letting each bite do its work. Chewing feels louder in the quiet cabin, so you pause between mouthfuls. Digestion brings a subtle warmth different from the fire's heat. It spreads from the inside out, steady and dependable. This internal warmth was often described as more reliable than any blanket. A curious detail that appears sporadically in winter recollections mentions people timing their last meal to coincide with the coldest part of the night. They believed it helped them endure until morning. Whether this practice truly improved outcomes remains unclear, but the belief itself shaped routines. Tonight you feel the logic in your bones. You drink a small amount of water, just enough to ease your throat. Too much would cool you. Balance again. Everything here is about balance. You set the cup back, carefully memorizing its position by touch as much as sight. Spilled water in winter cabins was more than an inconvenience, it was lost warmth. The hunger fades into the background, replaced by a gentle sense of stability. Your body has what it needs for now. That knowledge eases your mind. Anxiety often followed hunger during frontier winters, not because food was absent, but because its timing mattered so much. Tonight you planned well enough. You adjust the blanket again, pulling it over your lap and tucking the edges beneath your thighs. The air near the floor feels colder than before. Snow has piled higher against the cabin, insulating it in some places and chilling it in others. The temperature difference is subtle, but you feel it. People learned to read these changes through their skin long before thermometers were common. The fire responds to the shift in air with a soft sigh. Embers glow a little brighter, then settle. You resist adding wood. Not yet. Fires that burned too hot early often left nothing but ash before dawn. This restraint was widely understood, passed along through observation rather than instruction. There is discussion among researchers about how much caloric intake truly influenced survival during single-night events like this. Some argue that shelter and clothing mattered more. Others emphasize nutrition as a critical factor. Sitting here, you feel how interconnected everything is. Warmth, food, rest, awareness. None of it works alone. Your stomach settles, and with it your thoughts slow further. Hunger had sharpened them briefly. Now they drift again. You lean your head back and close your eyes for a moment. Darkness behind your eyelids feels no different than darkness beyond them. The fire's presence registers as warmth rather than light. You drift into a shallow rest, not quite sleep. Images surface without narrative. Snow moving sideways, firelight pulsing, a sense of waiting. You are aware enough to notice when your head tilts forward, chin dipping toward your chest. You correct it gently. Posture matters. Airflow matters. Even resting requires attention. The wind outside rises again, stronger this time. It rattles the door briefly, then slides along the wall. Snow shifts on the roof with a soft, heavy sound. You open your eyes fully now. Rest can wait. Awareness returns easily. Your body responds without panic. This is the rhythm you have settled into. You listen again, checking the familiar sounds against the new ones. Everything aligns. No new threats. No sudden changes. The cabin holds. The fire breathes. Your body remains warm enough. Hunger has done its job and stepped aside. You take another slow breath and let your shoulders relax. Night continues steady and unhurried. You're still here, still warm, still listening. For now, that is enough. Sleep tries to approach you in pieces rather than all at once. It drifts close, brushes against you, then pulls back when a sound shifts or a muscle tightens. You're not resisting it exactly. You're just unwilling to give yourself over completely. Nights like this taught people to rest lightly the way animals do, always ready to surface. You slide slightly lower in the chair, testing a position that lets your spine relax without letting your head drop too far forward. Finding a posture you can hold matters more than finding a comfortable one. Period descriptions often note that people slept sitting up during storms not out of fear but practicality. Rising from a chair is faster than untangling yourself from blankets on the floor. Your eyelids grow heavy. You let them close. Darkness fills in immediately, smooth and total. For a moment you almost forget where you are. Then the wind reminds you. A long rush along the wall, a brief tap near the roof line. You open your eyes again, not startled, just responsive. There is an odd technique mentioned occasionally in winter recollections, where people counted breaths or heartbeats to settle their minds without falling fully asleep. It helped them hover in a half-rested state, conserving energy while staying alert. You find yourself doing something similar now, not counting exactly, but noticing the rhythm. In, out, pause. The fire shifts and a log settles with a muted sound. You open your eyes again. The embers glow steady. Nothing is wrong. Your body relaxes back into the chair. This pattern repeats itself. Drift. Return. Drift again. Sleep here is not a destination. It is a shoreline you approach and retreat from. There is no clear agreement among researchers about whether this kind of fragmented rest was harmful or adaptive. Some interpretations suggest it left people exhausted over time. Others propose it was an effective response to environments where full sleep carried risk. Sitting here, you feel how natural it becomes. Your body adjusts without complaint. Your hands are warm now, tucked beneath the blanket. Your feet remain elevated toes, tingling gently rather than aching. This balance tells you are doing something right. Cold is honest. It communicates clearly when something is wrong. Silence from your body is reassurance. You catch yourself dreaming briefly while awake. Not images, exactly more like impressions. The sound of wind becomes water. The glow of embers turns into distant stars. These moments slide in and out without pulling you under. You notice them, then let them go. Outside, the storm maintains its pressure. It has not grown worse, but it has not eased either. Snow continues to pack itself against the cabin, insulating some seams while burdening others. People often remarked that storms felt endless in the middle, with no sign of beginning or end. This is that middle. You tilt your head slightly and listen again. The sounds match what you remember. No new notes, no sharp interruptions. That consistency allows you to close your eyes again just for a little longer this time. Your breathing slows further, deepening without effort. Your thoughts wander briefly to morning, not as a plan, but as an idea. Light returning, wind easing, shapes reappearing beyond the walls. You do not dwell on it. Thinking too far ahead wastes energy. Tonight is its own contained experience. A small shiver runs through you, not from cold, but from release. Muscles letting go. You adjust the blanket minimally, then still yourself again. Too much movement would undo the warmth you have built. This restraint becomes second nature quickly. Sleep rushes closer now. You allow it a little more space. Not enough to disappear, just enough to rest your eyes and quiet your mind. The fire continues its patient work. The cabin stands firm. The storm remains outside. You hover there between waking and rest, letting the night hold you without fully claiming you. This is how many people endured hours like these, not by conquering the night, but by sharing space with it, until morning felt possible again. The smell of the cabin settles into something familiar enough that you stop noticing it all at once. Instead, it comes and goes in waves depending on how the air shifts. Smoke softens, then sharpens. Warm wood releases a faint sweetness. Wool carries a quiet dampness from earlier snow. These scents combine into something that feels specific to this place and this night. If you left and returned, you would recognize it instantly. Accounts from isolated winter cabins often make passing mention of smell as a guide. When sight failed and sound blurred, scent confirmed that things were as they should be. Too much smoke meant a blocked draft. Too little meant a dying fire. People learn to trust their noses without thinking about it. Sitting here now, you understand why. You inhale slowly through your nose and feel the air warm slightly before it reaches your lungs. Breathing this way has become automatic. The cold no longer shocks when you inhale, it meets resistance. This adjustment was widely understood long before it was explained. Children were taught early. Adults relied on it instinctively. There is a faint metallic note in the air, probably from the stove fittings or tools near the hearth. It sharpens briefly when the fire brightens, then fades again. You notice it without reacting. Familiar smells mean stability. Sudden new ones would not. A small habit remembered by some people involved checking the scent of the room before resting. If anything felt off, they stayed alert longer. It sounds cautious, but nights like this rewarded caution. You take another slow breath and find nothing unusual. That reassures you more than the firelight does. Your body feels settled now. Not warm in a luxurious sense, but balanced. Hands are comfortable, feet still tingling faintly but not numb. This equilibrium tells you your choices have been adequate. Cold punishes mistakes quickly. The absence of punishment is feedback. Outside the storm continues, but its presence feels muted through the walls. Snow presses in thick layers, now changing how sound travels. The wind's voice softens, becoming more of a constant rush than a series of gusts. People often noted that heavy snow could make nights feel quieter even as conditions worsened. Insulation and danger arrived together. You lean forward slightly and check the fire. Embers glow steadily, their colour deep and even. You add a single small piece of wood, placing it gently. Not to build heat, but to maintain it. This measured approach appears repeatedly in winter recollections. Fires were tended like slow clocks, not flares. There is no single agreed explanation among historians for why some people describe these nights as calming, while others found them unbearable. Personality likely played a role, as did experience. Sitting here, you feel a strange peace settle over you. The storm has reduced your world to manageable size. There is relief in that. Your eyes drift closed again, but this time you do not open them immediately. The fire's warmth reaches you as a sensation rather than a sight. The sounds around you blur into a steady background. Wind, fire, breath. They merge into something like white noise, soothing rather than alarming. You catch a faint dream fragment while still aware. A sense of walking through snow without resistance, of light ahead that does not blind. It fades before forming fully. You remain present, but rested. The chair supports you without complaint. Wood holds your weight evenly. This simple reliability mattered deeply to people who lived in temporary shelters. Furniture was judged by whether it endured nights like this. Comfort came second. Your breathing deepens, chest rising and falling slowly. You notice how your body chooses its own rhythm when you stop directing it. That rhythm feels steady enough to trust. Outside, the storm shows no sign of ending, but it no longer feels urgent. It has become the environment rather than an event. Inside, you remain sheltered, attentive, and calm. You rest there, letting scent, sound, and warmth blend into a single experience. Night continues, but it no longer feels like something you must manage minute by minute. For now, it simply exists, and you exist within it. Time loosens its grip on you without asking permission. You realize this not because hours feel long, but because they stop feeling measurable at all. There is no marker to check against, no clock, no change in light, just a steady present that stretches quietly in every direction. The storm has taken over the job of marking time, and it does so poorly, repeating itself without variation. People who live through long winter nights often remark that storms became their only sense of passing hours. Wind rising suggested one phase. Snow settling suggested another. When both remained constant, time itself felt suspended. Records from isolated homesteads describe nights that seem to exist outside the calendar, altogether remembered later as impressions rather than sequences. You sit with this suspension and notice how your thoughts adapt. You stop wondering how late it is. You stop anticipating the next thing. The mind conserves energy by letting go of questions it cannot answer. This narrowing is not frightening. It is efficient. The fire continues its slow cycle, embers dim, then glow again as air shifts. You find yourself gauging time by this rhythm instead. Not minutes, not hours, just phases of warmth. When the glow dips too low, you respond. When it holds steady, you rest. There is a small practice that appears in a few winter recollections where people mark time by adding fuel at consistent intervals, not to track hours, but to reassure themselves that time was still moving forward. You consider doing something similar, then decide against it. The fire is stable. Artificial structure feels unnecessary. Your body remains quiet. Muscles stay relaxed without conscious effort. Cold has stopped demanding attention and begun to coexist with you instead. This shift matters. Early in the night, every sensation required interpretation. Now, only changes do. Outside, the wind no longer arrives in distinct gusts. It has flattened into a steady force, pushing snow against the cabin in a constant whisper. This continuity dulls urgency. When nothing changes, fear has nothing to attach itself to. There is disagreement among historians about whether this sense of timelessness was comforting or disorienting for frontier settlers. Some personal accounts describe it as peaceful. Others recall it as deeply unsettling. Your experience leans toward the first. Without deadlines or expectations, the night feels simpler. You tilt your head back and let it rest against the chair. The angle is not perfect, but it is sustainable. That word feels important. Everything tonight is judged by whether it can last. Positions, fire settings, mental focus. Sustainability replaces comfort as the measure of success. You notice a faint stiffness in your legs and shift them slightly. The movement is slow, careful, calculated. Blood moves. Warmth returns. You stop again. This small cycle repeats occasionally, keeping your body responsive without draining it. People learned these rhythms through necessity. Too much stillness led to numbness. Too much movement wasted heat. Your thoughts drift briefly to other nights, other places. Then they fade. The storm pulls attention back to the present. Snow slides softly from the roof, then settles. You listen, then dismiss it. Familiar now. The fire releases a quiet sigh as a log settles further into embers. You open your eyes to check it, then close them again. The action feels habitual rather than anxious. Habit keeps panic away. There is no sense of boredom here. Boredom requires excess energy. Tonight, energy is conserved carefully. Attention flows only where needed. The rest dissolves. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting each breath warm the next. The cabin holds, the storm presses, time stretches, thins, and finally stops feeling like something you need to measure. You remain there unhurried, suspended in a night that no longer asks anything of you beyond patience. Fear does not rush in here. It seeps. It arrives so quietly that you almost mistake it for thought. You notice it first when the cabin grows too still, when the wind pauses just long enough to leave a hollow space behind. In that pause, your mind looks for something to fill the gap. This is where unease likes to sit, People who spent winters in places like this often described fear as something managed rather than defeated. Period accounts suggest it was treated like cold or hunger, a condition to be addressed with routine. Panic, they learned, burned warmth faster than fire ever could. You recognize the sensation now, a slight tightening in your chest, a tendency to listen harder than necessary. You respond without drama. You take a slower breath. You adjust the blanket edge along your shoulder. You press your feet together lightly. These small actions give your body signals of control. Control steadies the mind. The fire remains unchanged. Its steady presence reassures you more than brightness would. You glance at it, note the glow, and look away again. Constant checking would feed anxiety. Occasional confirmation keeps it in check. There is a quietly strange solution remembered in a few winter stories where people repeated familiar phrases to themselves during storms. Not prayers exactly, more like reminders. Simple sentences about what was already true. The roof is holding, the fire is lit. Morning will come. You do not repeat words aloud, but the ideas settle in your thoughts naturally. Outside, the wind resumes its pressure, stronger now, pushing snow hard against the walls. The sound is loud but expected. You accept it without tension. Sudden changes alarm. Predictable force does not. Your body remains calm enough to notice details again. The way the chair presses into your back. The way warmth pools along your thighs beneath the blanket. The way your breath fogs slightly when you exhale too close to the cooler air. Awareness returns gradually as fear recedes. There is no settled agreement among researchers about how much fear affected survival outcomes during frontier winters. Some interpretations emphasize morale as critical. Others argue that material conditions mattered far more. Sitting here, you feel how intertwined they are. Fear makes you careless. Calm keeps you attentive. You close your eyes again, but this time you stay alert. You're not drifting. You're resting with intention. This state feels different from earlier, more grounded, less reactive. The night has taught you its pace, and you have adjusted to match it. A loud gust rattles the door briefly. You open your eyes listening. The latch holds. The sound passes. You do not move. Movement would waste warmth and achieve nothing. This restraint feels earned rather than forced. Your breathing settles into an even rhythm again. Each breath feels like a small act of maintenance. In, warm, out, slow. You notice how little effort it takes now compared to earlier. Adaptation happens quietly. The fear that arrived earlier has thinned, diluted by familiarity. The storm no longer feels unknown. It feels present but comprehensible. That difference matters. You rest your head back once more, letting the chair support you. The fire continues. The cabin holds. The night stretches on, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels demanding, yes, but fair. You remain still managing fear the same way people always have in places like this, with patience, with habit, with trust in what you can see, hear, and feel right now. Being alone stops feeling like a condition and starts feeling like an environment. Earlier in the night, isolation was something you noticed. Now it is simply the air you're sitting in. There is no contrast left to compare it against. No voices expected, no footsteps anticipated. The absence of others becomes steady, almost neutral. People who lived far from towns often wrote later that solitude at night felt different from solitude during the day. Daylight invited thought. Night narrowed it. In darkness, being alone was less about loneliness and more about responsibility. Everything that happened inside these walls belonged to you alone. You feel that weight gently now. Not as pressure, but as focus. If the fire falters, you will notice. If the wind changes, you will hear it. If your body cools too far, you will feel it. There is no one else to absorb those signals for you. Oddly, this clarity feels grounding. Your thoughts slow again, but not from fatigue. They slow because there is no considered need for speed. Nothing requires planning beyond the next small adjustment. This kind of mental quiet appears often in recollections from isolated cabins. People later described it as a strange calm that arrived only after the first hours of vigilance passed. You glance around the room, letting your eyes move without urgency. The same objects appear again. Chair, table, hearth. Each one feels more familiar than it did earlier, as if repetition has deepened their presence. These objects are not background anymore. They're companions of a sort. There is a faint comfort in knowing that no one expects anything of you tonight. No conversation, no performance, no explanation. Survival here is not dramatic. It is quiet competence. This attitude was common among people accustomed to frontier nights. Endurance was rarely celebrated in the moment. It was simply practiced. You notice how your posture has changed over time. Earlier your shoulders held tension. Now they rest more naturally. Your jaw unclenches. Your hands lie loosely beneath the blanket. The body adapts even when the mind does not consciously instruct it to. Adaptation happens in layers. Outside, the storm maintains its presence, but it no longer feels like an intruder. It feels like weather doing what weather does. That shift is subtle but important. When the environment stops feeling personal, fear loses its sharpest edge. Some people later claim that long nights alone sharpen their senses permanently. Others said the effects faded once they returned to company. Memory and experience never aligned perfectly on this point. Sitting here now, you feel alert but not strained. If this sharpness remains or disappears later hardly matters. It serves its purpose now. You reach out and adjust the blanket slightly, not because you are cold, but because the edge is folded in a way that feels inefficient. Small preferences emerge in stillness. Comfort becomes precise rather than indulgent. The fire glows steadily. You look at it less often now. Trust has replaced monitoring. This trust was earned through consistency, not optimism. The fire has behaved. The cabin has held. The storm has remained predictable in its persistence. Your breathing deepens again, settling into a rhythm that feels sustainable for hours. This is not sleep, but it is rest. A state where energy is preserved and awareness remains soft rather than sharp. You lean your head back and allow your thoughts to wander briefly. They drift toward faces you know, then fade. Toward places you have been, then dissolve. Nothing holds long enough to pull you away from the present. The night gently refuses distraction. Isolation, you realize, is not empty. It is full of small responsibilities and quiet confirmations. It asks you to pay attention, then rewards you by letting you rest once you do. You remain there alone but steady, letting the cabin, the storm, and your own body continue their slow negotiation through the night. Snow changes how sound moves through the world, and by now you feel that change clearly. The storm outside no longer crashes or roars. It muffles. It presses a soft hand over everything. Wind still moves, but its sharp edges are gone. Even the loudest gust arrives, padded as if wrapped in cloth before reaching your ears. People who slept through heavy snowfall often remark that the world felt smaller afterward, quieter in a way that was unsettling at first. Snow absorbed sound so completely that familiar distances disappeared. A tree falling 50 steps away could sound like it happened inside the walls. Tonight you experience the opposite. The outside world fades almost entirely, leaving only what is close. Inside the cabin, the quiet takes on a new quality. It is not empty. It is sealed. Sounds do not travel far here. They rise, hover, and settle quickly. Your breath feels close to your face. The fire's low murmur stays near the hearth, instead of echoing. Even your heartbeat seems contained within your chest rather than filling the room. You listen carefully, not because you expect danger, but because listening has become habit. Snow slides from the roof in a slow, heavy sigh. It lands somewhere below with a sound so soft you almost miss it. This sound tells you something important. The roof is shedding weight. The structure is adjusting as it should. Cabin dwellers paid close attention to these noises. A steady slide meant safety. A sudden crack meant concern. Experience taught them the difference even if they never wrote it down. You store this information away without thinking, another small reassurance added to the night. The fire seems quieter too, though you know it has not changed. Snow outside alters airflow, softening drafts and smoothing temperature shifts. The embers glow steadily as if content to work without interruption. You do not add wood. You do not need to. There is a detail mentioned occasionally in winter recollections where people described snow as making cabins feel more enclosed, not less. The added insulation dulled sound and trapped warmth, creating a strange sense of being wrapped up by the storm rather than threatened by it. Sitting here now, you feel that cocoon forming. You close your eyes and notice how little changes. Darkness remains absolute. Sound remains minimal. Your body remains balanced. This consistency makes it easier to relax further. Muscles soften incrementally. Breathing slows without effort. Outside, the storm continues its work silently. Snow packs itself into drifts that you cannot see. Paths disappear, landmarks vanish. If you stepped outside, now direction would be meaningless. People who did so often became disoriented within steps, a reality learned through bitter experience. You stay inside content with knowing rather than testing. The quiet deepens again. For a moment, it feels like the entire world has been padded and put away. You listen for the smallest sounds, a faint tick from cooling wood, the soft whisper of air moving through a crack. Nothing else intrudes. There has never been full agreement on whether this kind of silence was comforting or unnerving to those who lived with it regularly. Some accounts describe it as peaceful. Others recall it as oppressive. Your reaction shifts toward calm. The silence does not demand anything of you. It simply exists. You shift slightly, careful not to break the spell. The chair answers with a muted creak. The sound feels larger than it is simply because there is nothing competing with it. You smile faintly and still yourself again. Snow continues to settle against the cabin, adding layers that both protect and isolate. The outside world feels distant now, almost theoretical. Inside, everything remains immediate and tangible. You rest there surrounded by softened sound and steady warmth, letting the snow hold the night in place while you wait patient and unhurried for whatever comes next. Your body begins to speak in quieter ways now. Not complaints, just subtle signals. A stiffness in your lower back that suggests a shift would help. A slight cooling along your calves that tells you the blanket has thinned there. You respond to these messages slowly, deliberately, the way you have learned to respond to everything tonight. You adjust your posture by a few inches, easing your weight onto the other side of the chair. The movement sends a small ripple of sensation through your muscles, followed by relief. Blood moves. Warmth follows. You stop again before the heat can escape. These micro-adjustments were part of night living in cold places. People learned to make changes small enough that warmth stayed with them. Cabin life encouraged this attentiveness to the body. Without modern insulation or steady heat, comfort depended on constant minor corrections. Long-term records from frontier settlements make it clear that people who ignored these signals paid for it later. Numbness led to carelessness. Carelessness led to injury. You pull the blanket tighter around your legs, tucking it beneath your knees. The fabric is warm where it has been close to you, and cool where it has not. You smooth it once, then leave it alone. Too much fussing would undo the work it has already done. Your feet rest on the crate soles pressed lightly together. This position keeps warmth concentrated. It also feels oddly reassuring, a small closed circuit of heat. Some people discovered this by chance and never abandoned it. Others prefer to separate their feet. There was no single right way. Bodies differ. Nights teach you which advice applies to you. The fire remains steady, but you notice a slight change in its sound. Not weaker, just deeper. Snow has piled higher outside, altering airflow. The fire responds by drawing more slowly. You nod to yourself. This is expected. It does not require action yet. Your breathing remains even. In through the nose, out gently. Each breath feels like maintenance rather than effort. The air inside the cabin feels warmer now, less sharp. Snow has insulated the walls, further trapping what heat remains. This effect was well known to people who lived through blizzards. Storms took warmth away at first, then sometimes gave some of it back. You become aware of the way your clothing sits against your skin, seams, folds, places where fabric bunches slightly. You smooth one sleeve where it presses too tightly. Small discomforts become louder in stillness. Addressing them early keeps them from growing. Outside, the storm remains quiet and heavy. Snow slides occasionally from the roof, each time sounding softer than before. The cabin adjusts, shedding weight gradually. You listen for cracks or sharp shifts. None come. The structure holds. There is a subtle pleasure in realizing that nothing needs to be done right now. No wood to add. No drafts to block. No fear to manage. This state does not last forever, but it arrives often enough to be noticed. People who endured many nights like this learn to recognize and appreciate these lulls. You close your eyes again, not to sleep fully, but to rest your senses. Sound remains clear even without sight. You would notice change immediately. Trust in that awareness allows you to relax a little more. Your thoughts drift briefly, then settle. The night has narrowed them down to the essentials. Warmth, shelter, awareness. Everything else feels distant and unnecessary. You remain still, letting your body and the cabin maintain their quiet agreement. Adjust when needed. Rest when possible. Listen always. This rhythm carries you forward through the night, one small correction at a time. Memories begin to surface without asking permission. Not full scenes, just fragments. A voice you recognize but cannot place. A stretch of road under snow, featureless and pale. The mind drifts when it has nothing immediate to solve. Night gives it room to wander. You notice this drifting and allow it as long as it does not pull you away from awareness. Thoughts come and go like breath. In, out. Nothing lingers long enough to matter. This gentle movement of memory appears often in recollections from people who spent long winter nights awake. With no new input, the mind turns inward. The fire continues its steady work and you trust it now without checking. Trust has grown quietly over hours of consistency. You no longer feel the need to monitor every shift. If something changes, you will sense it. Until then, rest is allowed. Your body feels settled in its position. Muscles hold without strain. The chair supports you in a way that feels intentional rather than accidental. You shift once slightly, then still yourself again. That is enough. Outside, the storm maintains its presence, but it feels distant, as if it has moved just far enough away to let you breathe more easily. Snow presses, insulates, quiets. The cabin feels wrapped rather than battered. There is a small detail that returns to you now, a habit of rubbing hands together slowly inside the blanket rather than exposing them to the fire. The friction creates warmth, without losing it to the air. You do this once, then stop satisfied. It feels familiar, even if you do not remember learning it. Your breathing deepens again, matching the slow rhythm of the fire. Each breath arrives fully and leaves without rush. The body takes over, regulating itself without instruction. This autonomy feels like a gift earned through patience. You close your eyes and let images drift again. Snow falling straight down instead of sideways. Morning light reflecting off untouched drifts. These are not expectations, just possibilities passing through. They do not demand belief. The cabin remains quiet and steady. You feel its presence through the chair, the floor, the air. It holds without complaint. Nights like this tested structures as much as people, and survival depended on both doing their part. You notice how far the night has carried you already. not by checking time, but by sensing change in yourself. Fear has faded, hunger is quiet, cold is managed. What remains is endurance calm and unremarkable. You open your eyes again and look toward the hearth. The embers glow softly, deep red, unhurried. You leave them alone. Intervening now would be unnecessary. Your thoughts settle further, becoming fewer and farther between. Silence fills the spaces without feeling heavy. It feels earned. You rest there suspended between memory and awareness, letting the night continue around you without resistance. This state feels sustainable. You could remain like this for hours if needed. That knowledge brings comfort. The storm remains outside, the cabin holds, your body rests. The night moves forward, steady and quiet, carrying you with it. Warmth begins to feel less like something you receive and more like something you share. Earlier heat flowed from the fire to you in a simple way. Now it lingers in objects. The chair holds it. The table edge feels less cold to the touch. Even the air seems slower to steal it away. The cabin has absorbed your presence and is giving something back. People who lived in places like this often treated objects as extensions of themselves during winter nights. Blankets were arranged with care. Tools were placed close not just for use but for warmth. Walls were leaned against deliberately backs pressed to logs that had slowly taken in heat. The environment became part of the body's effort to endure. You rest your palm briefly against the side of the chair, noticing how it no longer shocks you with cold. That small change feels meaningful. It tells you that time and patience have shifted the balance in your favour. Nights like this rewarded those who waited rather than rushed. Your blanket has developed warm pockets where it folds over itself. You adjust it slightly to trap those pockets closer to your legs. The movement is precise, economical. You have learned how much motion is too much. The body teaches this quickly when conditions demand it. The fire remains low, its presence felt more than seen. You realise you have not checked it in a while. Trust has become habit. If it falters, you will know. Until then, attention is free to soften. Outside, the storm feels heavier now, but quieter. Snow has thickened against the cabin, pressing close ceiling gaps. The wind still moves, but its sharpness has dulled. This change often marked the deep middle of a blizzard. Conditions worsened even as the world grew quieter. You recognise this without alarm. There was a time when people believed cabins almost breathed during storms, drawing in warmth and holding it when snow piled high. While explanations varied, the experience itself was real enough to shape how people felt inside their walls. Sitting here, you understand the sentiment. The cabin feels alive in its own steady way. You shift your shoulders slightly and feel warmth redistribute beneath the blanket. Muscles loosen, joints settle. The body has found a position it can maintain. That matters more than comfort ever did. Your thoughts return briefly, then drift away again. You notice them without attachment. Nothing urgent remains to be solved. Awareness becomes broad rather than sharp, like listening to the whole room instead of one sound. The fire releases a soft sound as a log settles further into embers. You open your eyes, confirm that all is well, then close them again. The response feels automatic, not anxious. This balance between attention and rest has become natural. You feel how the cabin holds heat, now slowing the night's attempts to pull it away. Every object contributes. Even the walls seem less hostile, their cold kept at bay by layers of snow and time. You rest your head back and let the chair support you fully. The position feels sustainable. The night no longer asks you to be vigilant in the same way. It allows you this quiet exchange of warmth and stillness. You remain there, sharing heat with wood and fabric and air, letting the cabin become a partner rather than a barrier. The storm continues outside, but inside the balance holds. You sense midnight without needing proof. There is no clock to confirm it, no shift in light to mark it, but something settles deeper in the night. The cold feels more deliberate now, not sharper, just more complete, as if it has reached the depth it intended all along. This was often the point people remembered most clearly later, the moment when the night felt fully established. Your body responds before your thoughts do. You tuck your chin, slightly conserving warmth along your neck. Your shoulders draw in a fraction. These movements happen without planning. Experience, even borrowed experience, teaches the body faster than the mind. The fire remains steady, but its heat feels thinner at this hour. Not weaker, just more precious. You lean forward briefly, letting the warmth reach your face, then retreat again under the blanket. Lingering would waste what you gain. Short visits are enough. Many winter survivors later spoke of this part of the night as the test. Not because conditions worsened dramatically, but because endurance was measured here. Earlier effort either paid off or revealed its limits. Sitting here, you feel the quiet satisfaction of preparation holding. Outside, the wind shifts again, sliding across the roof instead of striking it directly. Snow answers with a low sliding sound as drifts adjust. The cabin responds with a deep, patient creak. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden. You register the exchange and let it pass. Your breathing deepens further, slower than before. Each breath feels intentional even though you are not directing it. Warm air in, used air out. The rhythm becomes a kind of anchor, steady and reassuring. There was once a belief that the coldest point of night arrived not at dawn but earlier, when the fire had burned longest and attention had waned. Whether this was always true mattered less than how people responded to it. They checked their fires once more, adjusted bedding, then committed to waiting it out. You feel yourself doing the same now, not through action but through acceptance. You make one small adjustment, pulling the blanket higher along your chest. The movement costs little and gives much. You settle again, immediately minimizing exposure. The warmth you have built feels fragile but sufficient. Your thoughts are sparse now. Not blank, just minimal. Ideas drift through like snowflakes and disappear just as quickly. Nothing sticks long enough to trouble you. The cabin feels deeply still. Even sound seems reluctant to move. You notice how much you trust this stillness now. Earlier silence raised questions. Now it answers them. You sit there steady and patient, sensing the night at its coldest and realizing that you are meeting it without resistance. This moment passes slowly, but it does pass. And when it does, you remain. Morning exists only as a possibility, not a promise. You can feel its idea pressing at the edge of awareness, a soft expectation that light will return eventually. Until then, the night holds all the authority. This is a quiet kind of hope, the kind that carries through hours rather than demanding immediate attention. Settlers frequently relied on this mindset. Winter mornings often arrived slower than anyone expected, and survival depended on patience. They did not rush the sunrise. They prepared for it, but they did not demand it. You feel the logic now, letting the idea of dawn exist without acting on it. Your body remains steady. Muscles stretch occasionally in response to lingering cold. You adjust the blanket, minimally trapping warmth where it matters most. Small actions like this add up. People learned that nights required attention to micro-movements. Overdoing it risked heat loss. Neglect risked stiffness or numbness. The storm continues outside, but it has adopted a rhythm. Snow slides from the roof in long, soft drifts. Wind pushes consistently but predictably, and the cabin responds quietly. You're aware of the pattern, now reading it in ways that go beyond sight or sound. Experience or instinct, you cannot tell which. A small habit remembered by a few settlers involved checking the thickness of snow against windowsills to estimate drift accumulation. It may have been a simple curiosity or an early warning system. Either way, the practice persisted enough to be noted occasionally. You catch yourself glancing toward the small window, imagining the drift quietly pressing against it. You breathe slowly and evenly, letting the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation warm your chest. Each breath feels measured, deliberate, sustainable. The night has taught you the value of pace. Too fast or too shallow and warmth escapes. Too slow or deep and focus falters. The middle ground feels perfect. There is no consensus among those who survived these nights about the best strategies for conserving energy. Some favoured continuous light activity. Others relied on extended stillness. Your approach blends both minimal movement attention to the body and responsiveness to the environment. The cabin itself seems to have absorbed your presence. Wood holds warmth where you leaned. Blankets have moulded slightly to your shape. You realise that the objects around you are not passive. They are part of the network of survival keeping the night bearable. You allow your mind to drift again, thoughts loosening like snowflakes falling slowly. Familiar memories rise briefly then fade. The storm continues indifferent to your attention. Outside is distance and cold, inside is warmth and rhythm. You feel neither lonely nor trapped. You feel engaged in a quiet partnership with your surroundings. Your gaze returns to the fire. The embers glow steadily. Not bright, not weak. They do exactly what they need to do. People in historical accounts noted that fire was as much about trust as heat. You have learned that now. Intervene only when necessary, otherwise let it be. You lean back, allowing your body to sink fully into the chair, supported and warmed. The night is not finished, but you have adapted. You have made the environment part of your rhythm. Awareness and rest exist together in balance. The idea of morning lingers in your mind like a distant note. You do not grasp at it. You simply allow it to exist, letting the night carry you forward until change arrives naturally. The storm seems almost alive as you notice patterns in its movement. Gusts arrive in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes heavier, each with a slightly different rhythm. You realize you can anticipate the next sound before it happens. Listening becomes more than habit. It is a form of understanding. You know the storm's personality, its quirks, its tempo. Accounts from frontier cabins often describe people learning the character of the wind in ways outsiders might not imagine. Snow ice and gusts became communicators, offering clues about pressure drift and the safety of the structure. The night was not random. It was intelligible once you learned its language. You adjust the blanket slightly around your shoulders. The small movement generates enough friction to warm the surface of your arms. Attention to these details mattered more than any large intervention. Minor adjustments preserved warmth and energy over hours. A detail mentioned occasionally in winter recollections involves using the echo of wind along walls to detect weak points. If the tone changed subtly, settlers checked seams and chinks in the logs. Some may have treated it as superstition, others as observation, but it helped them survive. You notice the way the cabin responds to gusts, subtle creaks and sighs, signalling structural dialogue. Your body is alert but calm. Muscles are relaxed, joints loose. You're present without strain. Breath flows evenly, warming your chest with each cycle. This steadiness was the goal for those who endured long nights. Alertness without tension. The fire continues quietly. The embers shift slowly as logs settle. You glance at it occasionally, not to adjust but to confirm stability. The practice mirrors centuries of observation. Let the fire be, unless there is reason to act. Intervening unnecessarily wastes resources and attention. Some people later reflected that nights like this altered perception of time and danger. No two nights were identical, and what worked one time might fail the next. Interpretations vary, but the principle was clear. Awareness combined with restraint preserved life. You feel that principle guiding your own movements and decisions. Snow presses against the cabin walls more firmly now. It insulates while also adding weight. You hear small slides along the roof and note them mentally. This observation requires no action, only recognition. You are participating in the rhythm of the cabin and storm together. You shift slightly in the chair, testing your posture. Comfort now comes from maintaining a position that preserves energy rather than provides luxury. Settlers learned that subtle, sustainable adjustments mattered more than indulgence. Outside, the wind pauses briefly and silence flows into the space like a soft tide. It is not complete. You're alert enough to know the storm has only changed tempo, not intensity. This nuance matters because unpreparedness in the next gust could be costly. You breathe, counting only in your mind, feeling warmth move through your body. You trust your senses. The night has taught you patience, awareness, and rhythm. The storm is steady, predictable now in its force, and you are in tune with it. You rest, letting awareness and endurance blend, trusting the cabin, the fire, and your own body to carry you through the hours remaining before dawn begins to whisper its approach. Memories from childhood surface, briefly slipping past without demanding attention. You notice them and let them go. Faces, voices, fleeting images of places all folded into the background of this night. The mind fills the silence, gently offering company without intrusion. People who endured long winters often describe similar mental drift, a private theatre played out in fragments between hours of stillness. Your body remains warm despite the cold pressing against the walls. Tiny shifts in position distribute heat where it matters. You flex your toes inside the blanket, feeling circulation respond. This careful attention to micro movements was crucial for survival. Settlers understood that minor corrections prevented discomfort from growing into dangerous cold. Outside, the wind makes another low sweep along the roof. Snow slides gentle but measured. You listen, noting changes in pitch and rhythm. The sound reassures you. The cabin answers predictably. In earlier accounts, frontier dwellers relied on this same instinct to gauge whether structures were holding, whether vents needed checking, and whether storms were escalating or steady. Observation was survival. A small practice appears in some diaries, tapping logs or walls lightly to see if the sound changed. This check could indicate shifting weight of snow or settling wood. You do not act on it, but awareness of subtle cues keeps you alert. It is a silent, continuous survey of your surroundings. Your breath moves evenly. In through the nose, warming before reaching the lungs, out slowly conserving heat. The rhythm becomes an anchor. Nights like this were often remembered less for fear or hardship, and more for the intimacy with basic bodily processes, breathing warmth and subtle movement. Awareness of the self became part of enduring the environment. The fire remained steady. Not bright, not dramatic, but sufficient. You glance once, confirming the embers are alive, then allow your attention to drift back into sensation rather than thought. Settlers often relied on fire as a guide rather than a source of distraction. You understand that now, letting observation merge with comfort, historians still debate whether the constant attention to sound and body during storms contributed to chronic alertness that persisted after winter, or whether the practice simply enhanced survival skills without lasting psychological effect. For now, it does not matter. You are alert but relaxed. Your mind wanders briefly to the concept of endurance. Not heroic, not dramatic, simply lasting. Nights like this required it quietly in small movements, in consistent breathing, in measured attention to heat and posture. It is a pattern that can sustain you for hours, even as fatigue creeps closer. Snow has packed against the cabin walls higher than before, softening the outside world almost completely. Noise is muffled, distant. You hear only what is immediate: fire, breath, wood settling. This selective hearing allows you to rest while remaining responsive. You settle fully into your chair, again trusting the cabin to hold. You notice the contrast between inner stillness and external movement. One is predictable, one is alive. The partnership keeps you balanced. For the moment, the night feels manageable. You feel patience settling deeper. The hours remain long, but endurance feels possible. You are part of the night as much as it is part of you. Stillness has become a skill. You sit without shifting, more than necessary, feeling your body settle into a pattern that conserves warmth and energy. Every small adjustment is deliberate. A tiny movement of your hand, a shift in your shoulders, a subtle repositioning of the blanket, all measured. You notice how easily motion now spreads heat or exposes you. Nights like this teach patience, teaching the body to move in harmony with itself. Frontier diaries often describe this same careful control over movement. Settlers realized that excessive activity wasted fuel and energy, while complete immobility could lead to numbness. Success was measured in maintaining equilibrium. You feel the wisdom embedded in your posture learned from experience more than instruction. Your ears remain alert. Even in this dense, muffled night, each sound carries meaning. A sudden tap or creak could indicate snow settling differently, wind pressing against a new seam, or something small moving inside the cabin. You do not react to every sound. Instead, you catalogue it, assessing whether it matters. You notice a subtle difference between the regular settling of the logs and the odd shuffle of the blanket as you shift slightly. Recognition comes naturally after long exposure to night patterns. A small practice remembered by a few winter travellers involved checking the temperature along walls with fingertips to gauge cold penetration. Some swore by it, others never bothered. You do it instinctively, sliding your hand along the nearest wall, noting nothing unusual. Tiny observations like these kept people alive. They formed a quiet, continuous monitoring system without requiring conscious stress. Your breathing deepens, filling the chest and expanding the lungs fully before letting the air out slowly. In this rhythm, warmth circulates efficiently. Past accounts suggest people who mastered controlled breathing felt more composed during long nights. The effect may have been physiological, psychological, or both. You feel the benefit now even without knowing the cause. The fire remains steady embers glowing faintly red. You glance toward it occasionally, not out of worry, but to maintain a connection. The flame is a quiet partner, predictable and reliable. Settlers often relied on the fire as both companion and signal, monitoring it as a way of staying attuned to the night's subtle shifts. Accounts differ on how much attention to micro details like this actually impacted survival. Some suggest it was critical, others imply it mattered less than shelter quality or clothing. You do not dwell on the debate. What matters is that awareness keeps you warm and alert. The interaction between fire body and cabin forms a delicate balance you have learned to maintain. Outside, snow continues to press against the cabin. Sound is muffled yet distinct. A light shift on the roof resonates through the walls, just enough to remind you of the storm's presence. The cabin responds quietly, reassuringly, as though it knows the rules. You appreciate this silent cooperation. You feel how small your space is now. Nothing beyond these walls requires attention. The rest of the world can wait. Time seems to stretch, each second held and examined. Nights like this exist outside the usual rules of hours and minutes. Settlers often noted the same sensation: the hours dilated, condensed, and then disappeared altogether. Your thoughts drift briefly to morning, but not insistently. It is a possibility, not a demand. You do not reach for it. You focus instead on breath warmth and small adjustments. The skill of stillness is not passive. It is active, subtle, and sustaining. You remain poised between wakefulness and rest, aware of every movement, every sound, every sensation, letting the night continue around you while you continue with it. A subtle change in the air signals that the storm may be shifting. Not enough to celebrate, just enough to notice. You feel it along your face and hands, a slight variation in pressure and chill. Awareness of these small shifts is as vital as noticing snow sliding from the roof or a log settling in the fire. It allows you to prepare in micro ways, adjusting blanket edges, posture, and even your breathing without disturbing the overall rhythm. Accounts from frontier nights often describe the same sensitivity. People train themselves to read the environment in detail, the sound of wind across a seam, the whisper of snow against boards, the way the fire responded to minor drafts. This kind of perception became instinct over time, honed by repeated nights like this one. You shift slightly, raising your head to observe the fire, confirming that embers glow steadily. Not bright, not weak, reliable. Settlers depended on this constancy for both practical warmth and reassurance. Your movements are careful, slow, and minimal. Each action carries purpose. A practice occasionally noted in winter diaries involved leaving small items near the hearth to maintain a sense of spatial orientation. Tools, blankets, or even a cup of water were placed intentionally, so the night could be navigated without light. You notice the cup near your hand and find comfort in its presence. Familiarity becomes a quiet anchor. The storm outside feels less aggressive now, though it continues to press against the cabin. Its intensity has not diminished, but its voice has softened. You understand the difference. The night is still active, but the shift in tempo allows a brief relaxation in vigilance. Moments like this are fleeting and must be used wisely. Breath continues its slow, steady rhythm. In through the nose, out gently. The warmth travels inward first, then spreads through your torso and limbs. This internal circulation, paired with small micro-adjustments of posture and blanket placement, sustains you. People who endured similar nights understood these processes intuitively. They measured success not in comfort, but in energy maintained and discomfort avoided. There is no clear record of how long people could maintain this balance without error. Some accounts suggest that even the most attentive individuals risked chills or frostbite if the storm's pace shifted unexpectedly. Others report success for long hours in identical conditions. The truth likely depends on a combination of the environment, preparedness, and attentiveness. Sitting here, you feel the accuracy of each moment's observation. Your thoughts drift in fragments, recalling small lessons learned from previous nights. Tiny habits surface, checking the fire's embers, pressing feet together, keeping breath slow and steady. Each memory reinforces your current behavior without conscious effort. The night teaches repetition without instruction. The cabin itself seems more present than ever. Wood, fabric, and fire collaborate silently. You sense their contributions to your survival. This partnership is delicate. Disturbance could upset the balance. Each object holds its place, and your interactions with them are measured and intentional. The storm continues outside, relentless yet predictable. Inside, warmth, posture, and awareness create a microcosm of order. You lean back slightly, letting your body settle fully. The night has offered a rhythm, and you are now fully participating in it. You wait patient, ready, and still. The first hint of change arrives quietly. Not light-breaking, not wind-stopping, but a subtle shift in temperature and sound. Snow against the cabin walls seems lighter. The air inside slightly easier to breathe. You notice it immediately because your body is finely attuned to the night. Even the smallest differences register as signals of potential transition. Settlers often wrote about these moments, describing them as the first whispers of morning or the storm easing. Sometimes the change was real, sometimes it was illusion created by long hours of vigilance and perception. The effect mattered regardless. It offered hope and guided actions. You feel that same cautious optimism now without expecting too much. Your body reacts with small adjustments. Shoulders relax further. Hands emerge briefly from beneath the blanket to stretch and warm. These minor movements refresh circulation without significant heat loss. Nights like this are a constant negotiation between rest and responsiveness. A habit mentioned occasionally in historical accounts involved listening for shifts in wind or snow patterns that signaled either a lull or escalation. People used these cues to decide when to stir the fire, when to adjust bedding, or when to prepare for activity. You do the same, instinctively noting the subtle changes and confirming stability. The fire glows steadily. You do not add wood yet. Its behavior suggests the internal air is stable, slightly warmer, more predictable. The embers release a steady, comforting heat that contrasts with the faintly cooler edges of the cabin. This balance has taken hours to establish. You honor it by minimal intervention. Outside, the storm persists, but its energy feels less urgent. The gusts are softer. Snow slides are slower. You recognize the pattern and take a deep breath, letting calm settle deeper into your body. Nights like this train patients teaching endurance through subtle signals rather than dramatic events. There is some disagreement among observers of frontier winters about whether these initial signs of change brought more relief or more anxiety. Some felt hope and readiness. Others anticipated further shifts staying tense. You notice that your response is measured alert but relaxed, the product of hours of attuned observation. Your mind drifts briefly to the idea of mourning, not fully awake, not planning, just acknowledging the possibility. The concept floats in the background without disturbing the present. Awareness remains your priority. Breath warmth, posture, and environment continue to guide each decision. You adjust the blanket slightly along your legs, trapping warmth that would otherwise escape. Feet are elevated, aligned for maximum circulation. You check nothing else. Small deliberate actions preserve the equilibrium that has been hard-earned. People survived countless nights through attentiveness to such minor details. The cabin holds, the fire holds, you hold. Each component of the night works in concert, a quiet network of balance. Even without vision, the night feels complete, intimate, and instructive. The first hints of change signal opportunity, but you do not rush. You remain still patient and fully embedded in the rhythm of the storm and shelter. The night finally loosens its grip. Not abruptly, but gently in measured increments that you feel rather than hear. Snow against the cabin wall shifts subtly. The air feels slightly lighter and the wind's edge softens. The storm has not vanished, but it has altered its pace, signalling that the long vigil is nearing its end. You notice this first through your body's shoulders. Release tension, breath becomes easier, and warmth seems to spread more naturally. People who survived winters like this often recalled the moment as a quiet relief rather than a dramatic event. The change was measured in perception rather than in sight. Settlers learned to trust these subtle cues. They were often more reliable than light sound or even timekeeping. You feel the same reassurance now, grounded in observation and experience. Your muscles loosen further. Tiny adjustments become more relaxed. Hands stretch briefly from beneath the blanket, toes flex inside thick fabric. Every motion is small, deliberate, and efficient. Nights like this demand economy of movement, and your body has learned the lesson. Energy is conserved, warmth is maintained, and awareness remains active. The fire glows consistently. Embers shift, releasing heat in a gentle rhythm that matches the subtle shift in the air. You glance at it, confirming its constancy, then return your focus inward. Fire has become a companion that requires minimal attention, yet provides steady reassurance. Earlier practices of tending every small flare now feel unnecessary. A small habit remembered in a few frontier diaries involved noticing how the wind's tone altered across a cabin's surfaces. A softer pressure, a slower drift of snow, a change in creak or pop could signal the storm's easing. Observers may have interpreted these signs differently, but the underlying utility was clear. You notice and acknowledge the subtle changes without needing to act. The storm continues outside, but it no longer dictates the tempo. Snow slides in measured sheets. Wind presses gently. The cabin responds silently, supporting your endurance. You sense a kind of equilibrium, forming one that feels sustainable and calm. Long nights like this were endured through observation, patience, and responsiveness, rather than action alone. Your thoughts drift briefly, flicking across memories and images, then dissolve back into quiet attention. There is no rush for morning. The idea exists soft and distant, but the night remains enough. Breath warmth and the steady presence of the cabin keep you grounded. Awareness and rest coexist in balance. The final few hours of darkness unfold slowly. You lean back fully, letting the chair support you, blankets arranged optimally. The body and mind have synchronized with the environment. Your senses are alert but relaxed, tuned to detect only meaningful change. The night has taught patience and attentiveness, offering both challenge and quiet companionship. You rest, observing the storm's gradual retreat, feeling the cabin's warmth as a shared comfort rather than mere shelter. Snow has insulated, wind has abated slightly, and the fire continues its soft, steady glow. You are safe, rested, and present. The storm will continue beyond the horizon, but you have endured. You have learned the rhythm, adapted to the environment, and met every subtle challenge the night offered. The cabin, the fire, and your own body form a quiet network of balance, holding you until the world beyond begins to lighten. You remain there, steady and still at the threshold of change, letting the night finally release you without urgency. Hours of observation, patience, and gentle movement have brought you to this moment. The long night has fulfilled its lessons,